Hello, Nat. What did you talk about interesting?
I did a short talk about the fact that Nike released some shoes that they actually knitted rather than assembled in some other manner. I found that super interesting at the time because I'm a knitter, not an industrial knitter, but I knit for fun. And the idea that you can take knitting and apply it to an industrial process that isn't just about producing garments, which is what normally happens, but something completely new that people hadn't imagined before, shoes. I was just like, what? You're doing what? This is fun. So I, at the time, investigated a little bit into like what's actually going on. I found out that Nike was buying out industrial flat knitting machines, and no one else could get a hold of them for a while because they were just like buying everything that was available to scale up production, and that people who were, like I guess professionally interested in flat knitting machines were like, whoa, there's this cool new thing happening. Like someone's like innovating in this whole business. So I got a sense that like even people who do it for a living are like, whoa, this is actually really an interesting way to use knitting. Yeah, for something other than clothes.
And when was this?
That was a decade ago.
Was it?
Yeah. I just checked and it was literally 2012 when Flying It came out.
And so what's happened since? So stuff must have happened since, right?
One of the things that happened was that everyone looked at Nike's Flyknit shoes and they were like, oh my god, we need to have some of that magic. People are clearly buying these shoes and they're really excited about them. So almost like the aesthetic of a knitted upper for a shoe has become like super super normalized. Everyone's doing it now. If you like Google knitted shoes, there are just like so many random brands that are at least using the aesthetic, if not necessarily like the exact process. I think that's really like there's something interesting in reusing the aesthetic, but not necessarily the approach because what Nike did, they produced the upper in a single piece. So they would change the tension of the threads, colors, like knitting techniques, in order to produce sort of different material qualities in different parts of the shoe. Whereas some of the knitted shoes that you see produced now, some of them are just like, we just made some knitted fabric and now we're assembling shoes out of it. So it has like some of the hallmarks of flying it, but not actually, it's not actually the same idea. Um, and it's become very easy to buy flat knitting machines on Alibaba now, and they're being advertised as fly knitting machines. People refer to Nike when selling them. Obviously, they're not produced by Nike. You can get one for $11,000.
Are you tempted?
Um, I am a little bit tempted because every time I watch videos of those machines actually working, I'm like, this is really cool. It's really fun to watch. But what am I gonna do with it? And where am I gonna put it, most importantly? I live in London.
So what is it just an aesthetic advantage or an aesthetic thing? Like why is flying it good and why are people copying it? Is it just trend or is there something else going on?
I think the original idea of flying it is really interesting because it involves very little waste in production. Because when you knit something in one piece, you don't have to cut it out from a flat sheet of fabric, so you don't really have as much wastage. And the fact that you can vary material properties in different parts using just slightly different knitting techniques means you can still get the same performance that you would expect from combining different materials in different ways. But like now, you just you have zero waste, you produce it as one piece. I don't know if like on industrial scale, like how big an impact of that is. I assume like there is some impact, which is why I find it interesting that you have this like really old process that's been around for ages. It's not, we can use it maybe in a way that makes it slightly more sustainable, more interesting, or lets us get qualities that maybe are harder to achieve with existing, like with other assembly methods. I don't know how to validate any of these hunches, so I don't know if like any of that is actually true. Um, but the yeah the it's clear that in the translation is the aesthetic that is the thing that appeals to people who are buying these things. They're probably not thinking like, oh cool, this is all made in one piece. They probably look at it and think, oh, it's like this is different to what sneakers used to be, and now it becomes a trend. So I think right now it is literally just, well, it's a trend. It doesn't matter like if we're getting anything like novel out of the performance there.
What's the next 10 years of knitting, I guess, is like what happens next?
I'm slightly worried that maybe this is it because it's been 10 years and no one has come up with anything else that feels like it's interesting. To me, it like making shoes out of what like a single piece of knitted fabric was just like, you can do what? What else can we do with it? But the what else hasn't like didn't necessarily materialize. At least not to my knowledge. I'm not necessarily an industrial knitting machine buff enough to know the latest, but I'm certainly not seeing like any other sort of consumer products that seem to be using similar techniques. The the one thing I said in my talk, I can't remember actually when the talk was, but the one thing I said when I talked about it last time, I compared it to 3D printing because one of the things that I found slightly like culturally interesting or maybe strange was that we have this like 3D manufacturing technology, knitting, which has been around for ages, well documented. We have machines that do it really well, and like that was the first time that we like came up with something like quite novel to do with them. Whereas 3D printing was being talked about as this amazing thing that is going to do all these amazing things, and no one was interested in the technology that was already ready for prime time. Or at least that's what it felt like. But now that it's been years since 3D printing, it feels like it's really it's showing the promise. One of the things that one of the ways in which 3D printing started becoming like something that is being used mass market in just like I guess like a consumer product is teeth aligners. I've had like a run of like I don't know what it's called, treatment, I guess, to straighten my teeth with 3D printed aligners that were just like sent to me by post after someone scanned my teeth and got a doctor to sign off on like what shape the prints should be, which feels like actually like that technology is now becoming like clearly used for, on a really large scale. So maybe I was a little bit like, 3D printing, what's it good for? And now it's clear, oh yeah, maybe there are actually lots of cool things we can do with it.
It does. I mean, you're right. I just in noticing things like people we know are doing, there is a sort of, it's definitely gone through the hype cycle and but it's now out into like banal. They just like, they do, I mean, useful but dull things, and that seems, yeah, maybe looking back, knitting was the flashy, actually the flashy cool thing, which turns out to only have not much, that one thing. But I don't know. Yeah, I guess it's that thing of these, like the you can only judge a technology like that over quite a long time scale. But
I think Nike do continue to do really interesting things with shoes, but now that they've done knitting, they've moved on to like, what can we do with shoes that you don't have to even touch with your hands to take off?
yeah, I've seen those, and they're about to do like a fully, like a glue-free shoe, aren't they? They're on the edges. Yeah, yeah, they're doing, because like gluing is one of the things that makes them really hard to recycle and or reuse.
They're definitely a fun company to watch, and it's really interesting to see these like things that feel really futuristic and experimental, but you can actually buy them in the shop and wear them, which to me just feels a little bit like, wow, that is kind of like a bit of magic.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Nat. That's great. We should talk again in another 10 years and see what's happened to knitting and 3D technology.
Perfect, perfect. Let's do that.